This is a quick how-to build video to describe how to build one of these linear actuators with a rack and pinion design. Really, linear actuator is really a fancy word for simply just a gear that turns a rack. Basically, it's a very, very simple thing. It sounds maybe a lot more complicated than it actually is. So here are the 3D printed parts. You're going to need the case. My dryer is done. The pinion or gear, which it basically is. This is a really cool piece that I made this in Blender. It's basically a pitch 1 or modulo 1 gear with some holes in it, which I'll show you later, is to connect the motor shaft to the clamping coupling to the plastic to the rack. Basically, you have this rack, which is, I think, printed with 40% infill. Pretty much everything is 40% infill, except maybe this top, which connects it to your device, your robot, by a 5mm metric pan head screw, machine screw, and nut. That should be 100% infill, because it needs to be pretty darn strong. Okay, and I have a hex wrench, and then I have the metric 3 screw and a lock washer that comes with the clamping coupling. And this is metric 3 12mm with I think that's a 3mm spacer for PCBs. There's also another combination that works. I think a 16 metric 3 16 and the next size, I think it's a metric 6 spacer. That works too. It causes a little more friction, but so I use a smaller one, which provides enough holding strength. Okay, so how do we connect this? So first of all, I generally put the clamping coupling in the pinion, and you have to make it so that the holes align, right? And they align the correct way. Then I usually screw in. Okay, so it has to go in the same time as the motor. It's a little tricky here. So you can see where the motor is going to be mounted, right here. So you need to do this all at one time, like put the clamping coupling in the, actually it doesn't have to go all at one time, but you have to just make sure so at first the pinion goes in, you have to have them aligned. You can kind of put in the screws and sort of tighten it a little bit initially. I only have one hand here, so I'm not going to do that. This one will go on to the one closest to the motor shaft, because that motor shaft has to be held very tightly. So use the screw that came with the clamping coupling. This one can be on the far end because it doesn't really connect with anything. I made a space for an axle, like a 5mm axle, but I find in practice I don't even really need to use that. So if you don't need to use it, really, I think why bother? So let's align this hole in this. Okay, now let's put in the motor. Okay, so now we have the clamping coupling there. It's okay that I didn't put the rack in yet. It doesn't really matter. It just means that you can put it in before, but if you put the gear in first, probably I should put the rack in. Actually, you can, since if it's not clamped, you can spin the rack in, and now you can really tighten it around the clamping coupling. Those holes would be aligned had I put that in there. Otherwise, you can always use the motor. Just put 2 battery leads on it and push the rack through, which is very nice. Then finally, so you want to attach the motor. I only really find that you only really need one little metric 3. I think this is a 10 or 12mm, probably 10. Right there in that hole, right there. Tighten that very tightly, and then pop the top on there. You're going to have 2 metric 3 screws. I think they're like metric 3 16 maybe, or 20, 25. Go through here, fasten it with a nut, or even preferably maybe a lock nut. Both work fine. Even a nut tightly fastened can work. And then there you have it. Then attach it, connect your motor to your ETH motors, and you're on your way.